Good afternoon once again, and thank you again for being here. You heard my introduction before. Greg Muller, professor from the University of Idaho, and I'm pleased to help this afternoon to facilitate a panel discussion on views from the field, solutions for a better future. The comment I made earlier this morning about practical sustainability, something that you can hold on to, I think is extremely important as we look towards the future. Vision without action is meaningless, as we all know. We have to have a good concept of the long view in terms of the goals and the actions that we need to get there. Today we've brought together a group of individuals, accomplished individuals I might add, whose biographies are in your conference materials. And what we've asked these individuals to do is to think about the future a little bit and some of the solutions that we might have for this pathway to the better future that we are on. Our panelists include Ted Schuttler, MD, PhD, who you heard speak this morning, an accomplished environmental health scientist, one of the leaders in his field. We are also delighted to have this afternoon the mayor of Missoula, Mayor John Engen. Thank you very much for being here. We also have the Dean of the College of Nursing at Washington State University and an expert in environmental health research and a focus on rural health, and that's Patricia Butterfield. Thank you as well, Patricia, for being here. We have Derek Kanwisher, and Derek is, for lack of a better description, representing youth of today. He's a doctoral student with a focus on sustainability. And you know, when we talk about reserve to production ratio of oil being 46 years, I'm probably not going to be here, but I am for certain pretty sure that Derek will be here. And finally, we have Marianne Sladish-Lance, and she is a member of the St. Patrick's staff. She is mission leadership for Providence Health and Services. So thank you as well, Marianne, for being here. So the panelists have been asked to think about the views from the field, their particular view for this better future and the solutions we need as we approach this solution. So I'd ask at this point in time, Patricia, since you're closest to us, what are we looking for in terms of solutions for a better future?
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity to be here. I've really enjoyed the presentations, and I'm going to speak briefly about a problem and a potential solution. As Greg mentioned, my work is primarily in the area of rural environmental health. I want to speak with you very briefly about a study that involved Montanans and some people in rural Washington, 441 children under the age of 7, whose parents were at 200% poverty or less. Tested the home for a variety of contaminants. We tested for carbon monoxide, full well screen of biological and chemical contaminants, tested for VOCs. We tested for cotinine, a metabolite of environmental tobacco smoke. We tested all the children for lead. We tested the wall for the amount of humidity in it as a possible indicator of humidity or mold, mildew in back of the walls. Then we sent a public health nurse into half those homes in a randomized controlled trial to talk with the families about practical free solutions that they could do to protect their children. And over this 5-year study, we had 441 children. And every one of the indicators on improvement in terms of the parents' knowledge, self-efficacy, their sense of confidence, their ability to move from thought to action changed positively. And this was published in the American Journal of Public Health in a supplement a couple of months ago. Half of the families were in rural Gallatin County. They were all in private wells or wells that have less than 15 hookups. And so these were on wells that weren't tested regularly. What did we find? We found a lot of good things. But we also found some homes that the carbon monoxide level was above 250 parts per million. in terms of really at a combustion device, whereas we were using a threshold of 30. We found about 30% of the homes in Gallatin County were above the radon threshold for radon. We found kids that had lead, but not a lot, not as much as you'd think, and so that was really encouraging. We found some children that had cotinine. We used an action level of 5. We found some kids that had environmental tobacco smoke in their saliva at a level of over 80, and the action level was 5 there. In the radon, the action level was 4, and we found a couple of homes that the radon level was over 90. So we saw plenty to be worried about. There was no one thing. The nurses had a really good impact, so I want to talk about the problem and the solution. The problem was something happened in the course of the 5 years that I never, ever would have anticipated in 30 years of being a public health nurse. And the thing that happened is the end of public health nursing, which has surprised and dismayed me. There's been so much of an erosion of support and money for public health nursing visits, and it's a tragic loss for our society when you look at the legacy. And so nurses are stretched even thinner, and physicians are stretched even thinner, and great progressive health departments like Missoula City County are stretched even further. And so it's something I never would have anticipated. So the solution I would propose to you as we're looking at is what happens if environmental health becomes a part of every piece of health care that you receive, and that a great place like St. Pat's, which sponsors this conference, with amazing leadership like Beth Shank and Georgia and many of the very amazing providers here, that just like having your cholesterol tested or your mammogram or your prostate exam, you learn a little bit in terms of environmental health. And we push insurers for a little broader coverage. And so that healthcare becomes defined not just as the CPT codes and the ICD-9 codes for procedures, but that healthcare includes health and care, and includes both of those facets. And I think that your community is well poised for this expanded role and to be a national model. So with that, I'll stop and applaud what you're doing in this community and the importance of today's conversation. Thank you.
And that gives us a lot to reflect on, and we'll come back and revisit that. And we're going to hop all the way down to the end of the table. And our panel has been courteous enough to allow me to call them by their first name. So, John, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about the view from the field from your perspectives.
Certainly, except I was fully prepared to go last. Yeah. So, sort of my standard. Well, thanks very much. I am the least among this panel, and my premise here is pretty simple, and that is that cities, by their very nature, are sustainable. Cities are examples of the way we collectively decide to work together, take advantage of resources, collect those resources, pay for those resources, and ultimately, I think, conserve those resources. And we hear a lot about rural Montana, and I make some of our congressional delegation a little bit nuts because they're in the business of bringing money home to their rural area, but most Montanans live in cities. We are an urban state with a small population. And if those cities do well, I think rural Montana does well. We concentrate our populations in centers, and we allow the activities that go on outside of those centers to go on much as they have for decades, and in some cases centuries, provided that we find some wilderness designation. And cities do things big and small all day long that are about sustainability, ranging from the small for us which is all about energy conservation. We engage in conservation activities as a municipality, and interestingly enough, city staff members, I think, again, by their very nature, are conservationists. They're really tuned to the notion that they need to conserve resources to make things work for the citizens we serve. So, for example, at the City of Missoula, over the course of the last 2 years, we've engaged in a process of auditing all of our systems to know where we're burning energy and how we can begin to conserve that energy. And we've paid to buy new equipment in some cases to ensure that we're using less energy, and we're paying for that equipment from the savings from using less energy. It's called performance contracting. It's working all over the United States, and it's worked for us. We're continuing to do that. We've also reached out over time in terms of energy conservation, and through a federal grant that came through the ARA program from the President and that Congress, we applied what we call the Green Blocks program around Missoula. So we had team captains basically in neighborhoods who got together and said, let's help our neighbors conserve energy. And to date, I think we've insulated better than 300 homes through 2 rounds of that program. It's really simple stuff, and as we talk about environmental health, a piece of environmental health is being warm in the wintertime, or as cool as you can be in the summertime. And for low-income people in particular, the idea that we can come in, insulate a home, help them save money, be more comfortable, and ultimately, I think, improve their lives is pretty remarkable, and it's a really simple thing. And the more of those simple things that we can do, I think the better off we will be. We do much more, I hope, for sustainability. It's not just about energy conservation. I think it's conservation of the human spirit. And I like to think that from this room, for example, you can do a pivot and see lots of space around us that we as a community have elected to protect, not only for ourselves but for future generations. I had a hike on Mount Jumbo this morning, and I was about as far away from my corner office in City Hall as I've been in a long time, and it felt far away, and we all need that once in a while. So I hope that we're doing things from large to small, big picture to tiny picture, day to day and over the course of time.
Thank you. Derek, you bring a unique perspective to this group. Why don't you tell us about your views of the solutions for a better future?
Thanks. It's good to be here, be a part of this dialogue about, I guess, solutions for the future. So as a graduate student at the University of Montana, I've had a lot of experience working on different conservation environmental issues, and today I want to talk about an issue. I'm associated with a bunch of people in town here working on this Transition Town Missoula group. So generally defined, a transition town seeks to develop local economies and resilient communities in the face of climate change and peak oil. So it's those two issues together that makes this approach, or it kind of defines the problem that enables kind of a more creative solution that enables transition to work. So it's probably not a good idea to avoid, and how long can we do that? Avoid the problems of climate change. And we're all aware of rising sea levels and desertification, shifting agricultural lands, and also we can't ignore our addiction to oil. And those problems are only going to get worse as until we do something about it. So, let me grab a little cup. Replacing the flower arrangement.
Is that beer?
So actually we presented at one of the schools recently, and I brought this out, and the teacher got upset real quickly, so I was like, what's going on? So it's not a growler, but looks like it. But this is the great marvel of the modern age. It's a gallon of oil. It's about, let's say, ancient sunlight distilled over 100 million years. And this simple substance here has enabled a lot of things to happen that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So, for example, thanks to the productive capacity of oil, or that's enabled us, I guess, it's increased human capacity to do work by 70 times. And I guess estimating that there's maybe 60 people in here, maybe 75, that would mean about 5 months of work for, well, 2.5 months of work, all of you, working continuously to equate the amount of energy that's in this 1 gallon of oil. So there's 42 gallons in a barrel, which is traded on the world market. Half of that is turned into gasoline. The rest of that is not necessarily visible, but it's ever present anywhere you look. It's in the chairs you're sitting on, the clothes you're wearing. Anything else, like even the organic food that we have today was likely shipped with fossil fuels. So the United States uses 18.8 million barrels a day. So we're at the center of this problem. And 18.8 million gallons of oil is more than China, India, Japan, and Russia combined. So being at the center of the problem presents, yes, a problem, but it's also an opportunity to take the lead on turning that tide. My other prop is none other than the petroleum interval. So just looking at the scale of time here, we're talking about agriculture, industrial agriculture starting here, 1930s, Industrial Revolution, things. We're up at the peak, as a lot of scientists would say, and but as you pointed out earlier, Greg, 46 years left of oil, that's pretty shocking. I haven't even come across that stat. So, not only, as you pointed out, Greg, is oil running out, but the remaining oil is more and more difficult to get out of the ground, so therefore it's becoming more and more expensive. And with the increasing population, there's more and more competition and demand for that remaining resource that is dwindling. So, just talking about energy of return very briefly, in the 1930s, for 1 unit of energy to try and extract that oil, we get 100 units back. Now we're looking at only getting about 11 units back. Look at things like the tar sands, just as an illustration of desperation. In a sign of the times, you get maybe 4 or 3 units back for every unit that you put forth to get that. Plus, not even mentioning all the environmental and social harms that result from that. So I know this is supposed to be about solutions. So let me offer a brief outline of how this problem does present a solution. And I did kind of pick out 3 critical actions. The first one, and then we just read it here, is taking responsibility for ourselves is our opportunity to create a better future today and for future generations. So we have the responsibility. We have many rights, but with those rights come responsibilities, and not only to ourselves, but to the future. If we wait for governments to take action, it'll likely be too little, too late. No offense, John. If we rely solely on intrepid and dedicated individuals, it will be too little. But if we act as communities, it just may be enough and just in time. And with respect to the immediacy of climate change and peak oil as prominent issues, climate change has often said that we should change, whereas peak oil is going to mean we have to change or be forced to change. So what's going to happen when gasoline, for example, is $8 or $12 a gallon? Are our behaviors, are the way we view the world going to be different? So how can communities change the world? It's a big question. Well, maybe they can't, but individuals can change their communities. And using that logic, it's about economy of scale, and it's about building communities that can influence regions, can maybe influence states, and the scale goes from there. So my second critical action is within your community, create a positive vision for the future. Dream big. I mean, this is our opportunity, and it's our obligation. For example, envision Missoula 2020, or envision Missoula 2030. What does that look like? The way to get there is act locally. If economic relocalization is going to be the result of our resource dependence, and that sounds like a problem, why not make it the strategy to produce most of our goods here? We can be self-reliant and we can be resilient. Missoula has already made substantial strides in this direction and possesses a strong sense of community. This is where we can take the fear of peak oil and flip it on its head. If I had my prop, I would flip it over and the peak that did go up would go down. So with Transition Missoula, it's a group of separate entities that have come together because of similar ideologies and common ground. And together, and you're going to hear more about that later because we do have a breakout session for Transition Missoula and the vision. But anyway, we're working on awareness, cooperation, outreach, education. For example, these pictures that we see on the wall came from a presentation to, I can't remember, in a high school in town, and we had freshman students as well as junior students. And they're pretty revealing pictures if you want to get a sense of what they think our future looks like. So we've formed discussion and reading groups, reading the Transition Handbook. This is available at the table out there. I'm not trying to sell it, but I think we could all use it. Hosted monthly film series. This Tuesday, for example, we're showing the power of community, how Cuba survived peak oil. We set up a steering committee. We've produced a good intuitive website, hosted public talks, done outreach to schools, and we have our upcoming public celebration and potluck, or group celebration and potluck. So as we move forward, we're talking about dreaming big. We're talking about forming working groups, expanding local food production, CSAs, community gardens, working on community-owned energy companies, access to quality, affordable housing, alternative currencies, like a time bank or Ithaca Hours or Berkshires or other examples. Promote and facilitate the great reskilling. Work with organizations like MUD or Home Resources or the UN Flat or others. Waste and resource management, because waste is only waste because we call it that. Transportation initiatives for to encourage bike, walk, and bus. A municipally owned water source. Local medicinal capacity, holistic health, herbal remedies, and work towards an energy descent action plan. This can't happen by ourselves. We have to work as a group and as a community. So we need to understand and work with our surrounding environment. Recognize and acknowledge what work has already been done and who has been a part of that effort. We need to formulate beneficial relationships and find common ground, despite our differences. Can we bring together industry, government, academia, nonprofits, and the community at large for a solutions-based dialogue about the state of the community? As one strategy from the ground up, I believe we can do this in cooperation and in solidarity. Thanks.
Derek, thank you for sharing those words with us here today. Marianne, why don't you tell us a little bit about your views in the field? In particular, you come from a different direction than some of the other panelists and your solutions for a better future.
So in saying that, I'm going to vie with John for being the least qualified to be among this panel. I'm not a a scientist. I don't study statistics. I find myself overwhelmed, really, by the magnitude of the problem that we're talking about. So my challenge really is to not get so overburdened by how big this is and how little I personally can do to turn the tide, if you would. And so I don't know how many of you were here last night, but we had really the privilege of listening to this whole conversation from a spiritual perspective. And in fact, that's what touches me. And what I would say from that conversation last night is, from my perspective, the crux of the solution. And Greg, you started this by saying that without passion, a vision is useless. And that sort of struck me, because I thought, wow, it never occurred to me that you could have a vision without passion. And so acknowledging that from a spiritual perspective, there is a vision of what right order might look like, or what God might have intended when God's love poured out and this world was created. And Derek, you talk about working together in community, and we're all in this as one. And at the same time, maybe we don't know how to be together because we're focused on what divides us. And how do we shift our whole consciousness to say that if we see what is one among us, or what is like among us, that we're brought together in community. So I too was struck by the art over there. Many of them described their art in words. The one that particularly grabbed me was by, I assume, a young woman by the name of Cheyenne, that says, if we work together, our world could become a world of love and peace. So Bryony, you're just in my line of view, and I heard your voice on that video say, we know what to do. And you said that with great passion. And that's my sense, is we do know, we, not I, we do know what to do. And it's this kind of gathering that is a challenge to me, to not get caught up in how those statistics make me feel powerless, but how the vision gives me hope. And acknowledging that we are in this together, and that we have leaders like John, who believes that this community can do it. And young people like Derek, that reminds us that there's great passion and hope for our future. So this little flyer out there that I grabbed is the very thing that helps me realize that I don't have to do it all by noon tomorrow. But there are little pieces of things that I really can do without a whole lot of effort. And reminders like this are a great gift. So that's my view from the field.
Thank you for sharing. Marianne, you wondered aloud whether or not you could do anything. I think just sharing your words, you changed the lives of the people that are here today. So thank you very much. Ted, I'm going to move on to you. Ted, you've had a wide range of experience. You've been at this, I'm going to go ahead and say decades. So you carry a unique perspective from many of the people, not only in today's conversation, but for the conversation out there in the public square. Why don't you give us a little bit of your feedback on your view from the field and solutions for the future?
Well, what I'd like to think about is the opportunities to intersect with that complex system I described this morning in ways that would change it at multiple levels. I think that the opportunities in the food and agricultural system is a wonderful place to think about. From a medical point of view, the data are terribly clear that diet and exercise reduce the onset of many of the diseases and disorders that plague our families, our communities, and our healthcare institutions, and our economy. They should be built in at every level. Physical education in school systems should be the last thing to go, not the first thing to go when budgets are tight. We should do what we need to do to reform the school lunch programs. We need to get better food, more nutritious food available to more people, and we can solve this gallon of oil problem by thinking about the intersection between our food system and the drivers of climate change, and how we're going to produce food for people on this planet in ways that's not so dependent on fossil fuels. And there's no single answer to that. It's going to be different in every place. And Derek and people in Missoula are going to figure out how to do it here, and people somewhere else are going to figure out to do it in their context. So I think food is a great integrator. A second theme that emerges for me comes from what you said this morning, Greg, that has to do with what businesses are doing. You told us about FedEx and Subway and some of the other businesses that are undertaking certain kinds of activities to try to reduce their footprint. Healthcare Without Harm, which Beth is intimately involved with here, is a 15-year project that's going on to try to reduce the environmental footprint of the medical industry, and it's now situated across the country and throughout the world. It's got projects in environmentally friendly purchasing, it's got food programs, energy reduction, green building, and so on. We actually have seen the markets shift by consumers demanding safer products. Products made out of safer materials. Baxter and Abbott, two of the largest medical device manufacturers in the world, literally developed an entire new line of IV products and bags and tubing and so forth, made out of polymers that are an alternative to polyvinyl chloride because it was demanded by their customers. So this was a shift of major corporations. And there are other businesses that are also responding to this kind of a need. One thing I would challenge hospitals with is to ask themselves the extent to which they're really interested in the primary prevention of the diseases that they're treating within their walls, right? We might do it in a more environmentally preferable way, but if we haven't taken the steps that we can to reduce the flow of disease and illness through the front door, I think we may be tinkering around the margins. And so what kinds of primary prevention activities are going on in the community, and to what extent is the hospital playing in that area of intervention? So that's something I'd like to see healthcare tackle more than they have in most places that I've seen. I'm going to tell you about 2 or 3 things that are going on in my small organization, the Science and Environmental Health Network, and you can find more details at sehn.org. We've been strong proponents of the precautionary principle for many years. The precautionary principle says that when there are threats of harm to human health or the environment, precautionary action should be taken even if some cause and effect relationships are not fully understood. This gets into a discussion about what's the weight of evidence, what do we know? But notice also embedded in the precautionary principle is the call to action based on what we know. It's an ethical directive. This is a statement that incorporates both what do we know scientifically as well as what should we do. What's the ethical response to what we know? And there are a lot of interesting ideas that are wrapped up in that I invite you to think about and maybe read more about on our website. As a consequence of that, we've developed several other ideas that you can learn more about there. We've proposed the concept of the guardian for future generations. So the city council, the state government, the county public health department, whoever's making decisions on whatever topics, we could imagine having somebody who's assigned to that decision-making process who is there to speak for future generations. That is that person's role. Not for them, not for their family, not for today, but for the people who are yet to come. To give that perspective, to bring it to the table. We can also imagine that perspective being brought in to represent other species, non-human species. You can shape this in various ways, but to get the voice at the table is what we're trying to argue for. Our executive director has just finished a project in the northern reaches of Canada where she went to examine the consequences of a large mine called I'm forgetting, it's a huge gold mine up in the Northwest Territory, whose tailings represent a threat to people who live in that area for 25,000 generations. So this brings us into a conversation about what does it mean to take perpetual care of the messes we've made. And so she, in consultation with the communities there and so forth, has developed some principles of perpetual care and a paper to go along with that that's up on our website that might be of interest to you, because I actually think that we are dealing with this in places far beyond northern Canada, but we're actually creating the need for perpetual care in a number of places. And finally, another project that we've been engaged in is recognizing that not only does science have to catch up with the new realities of this world of cumulative impacts, but the law needs to catch up. Because the law, and many of the ways that the law works, were derived from a world that existed 75 or 100 years ago, when driving economic growth above everything else was of the highest priority. But as we heard this morning, and I think the very important conversation, can't have perpetual economic growth on a finite planet. And so how does our law begin to change to recognize that? How do our laws begin to deal with the fact that if you already have an overburdened community, and then you want one more activity to come into it, and they have to go through some sort of a permitting process, how do we think about that when the community is already overburdened? Should that new proposal be kept out because it's an overburdened community, or should everybody be asked to lower their footprint a little bit? So I'm saying there's a right answer to that, except that it's a conversation we need to have, and it needs to find its way into our legal structure as well. So there's plenty there to do. And then let me just end by saying that at the federal level, I totally agree with you that so much of this needs to be at the community level. There's no question, however, that people in Washington are making laws that do affect us at local levels, and we know how that works. That's about power and money, and we need campaign finance reform.
Thank you, Ted. And you know, a sub-theme of this conference is as well engaging or increasing the engagement of the medical community in some of these issues that we talked about today. And I might add from your comment that the father of epidemiology, a doctor, was also the first one, the progenitor of the precautionary principle in the 19th century cholera outbreak in England. We didn't know why the cause was, but we knew enough to take action. Well, one of the themes and one of the words that I heard come up in most of your presentations was the word transition. And it's an important concept because it is, in fact, the transition from today to the future that is going to create this more positive outcome. I think of the words of Bertolt Brecht, a 20th century playwright and writer: because things are the way they are, things won't stay the way they are. And you can reflect on those words in many domains, but they do have meaning and application to our current challenges for sustainability, our current challenges for environmental health. So what I'd like the panel to address is the rate of change in this transition to this future. What, and I'll let anybody answer that would like to, what are the concepts, the major concepts and drivers in accelerating the rate of change in transition?
I'll answer from the perspective of someone for many years, from a public health nursing perspective, has been talking about the concept of personal, household, environmental health as it relates to health disparities in rural areas. I think that what you said this morning about urgency and hope is really important, and the emphasis on urgency. When you really look at the prevailing forces and what we're facing in terms of change, I think it's really important to accelerate our time to insight, and that we really need action on multiple fronts. I've learned a whole lot through this panel, and every one of the folks here has brought forward actions. And as a public health advocate, I would say that what you can do locally in terms of support for local public health, in terms of for regulation and enforcement, which is something we don't talk a lot about, and then from the journey from the head to the heart, where we take information and we help people understand, not just 9 people get their chemicals tested, although a lot of that national work started here in this community, but everyone knows how things came to pose risks to their children, and then everyone has a stake in changing that. And then I think that is the driver in terms of the tipping point, so that we're working upstream to prevent these exposures rather than dealing with the downstream multi-generational consequences. Because as long as we're doing that, we're chasing the wrong tail here in terms of doing that. And I think, moving upstream to look at the antecedent factors in terms of reducing the source of exposure, creating the transformational change and urgency is the theme of the day.
Marianne, I saw you shaking your head, so you must be in agreement with what Patricia tells us.
Certainly in agreement. And one of the things that I find myself saying with the people with whom I work is that we're not in a time of increasing change, but we happen to be evolving. This is evolution. And so here we are, agents of evolution for whatever reason at this time in the course of history. And so whereas it is upon us to transition how things are to how things are going to be, there is we hang on to what we know. So on the one hand, we know we must move beyond where we are. And at the same time, everything that keeps us stable is the essence of the problem. So I work, most of my work is with healthcare leaders in the states of Montana, Alaska, Washington, Oregon, and California. And all of them are very interested in how to treat health at the way that it needs to be treated, and at the same time knowing using the image that while we're going down the road 70 miles an hour, we got to change the tires at the same time. So we got to keep doing what we're doing until we know how to do what we know we need to do, and that's incredibly challenging, and at the same time invigorating because we do know as our awareness is evolving, we do know that how things are already is in the process of transitioning. So, but that doesn't always feel very good in the moment.
John, Marianne just told us that we need to be agents of evolution on this transition. Would you agree with that, or would you step it up and say maybe we need to be agents of revolution?
I'll go with that. That's all right.
So if you're in government and you hear the word revolution, you get a little...
Precisely my point.
This is so this is sort of deeper thinking than I'm used to on a Saturday afternoon. So let me tell you what I am thinking about. And I don't know whether we have evolution or revolution, but what I do know is that Derek suggested that government ain't going to do it. I will suggest that local government can do it, because I believe that local government is community made manifest. And I and the folks with whom I serve in local government are as responsive as you're ever going to find in that big construct of government, because we're as close as we can possibly be. And in my case, and I think in the case of the folks I serve with, we're in this together. We have a commitment to the community. We take our commitment and responsibility, which I believe is shared with citizens, pretty seriously. So really, if you want to make change, I think local government can be a fantastic partner in making that change. This community has been talking about some of these notions for more than a decade, and in some cases longer than that, and we have a number of planning documents today, some gathering dust and some getting dusted off, that suggests we need to deal with critical issues of sustainability. And some of those issues, you know, I'm not sure that we are ready for that conversation. I'm not sure we're fully ready for the conversation of when is a community overburdened. I think today, generally speaking, we accept that we are going to grow at X percentage. I'm not sure that we shouldn't have that conversation about when a community is overburdened, but it's a tough one. It's a really tough one. And just getting to the point where we suggest that we need to pay attention to those burdens and pay attention to our resources and understand how we deploy and exploit, in the best sense of those, in the best sense of that word, those resources is critical. So we've done that in a couple of ways. We have planning documents around transportation, ironically called Envision Missoula, which are all about stepping away from the single occupancy vehicle and moving toward a community that is designed, that is consciously built for folks who are on feet or turning a sprocket. We have a planning document that's identified with some homage to my Norwegian heritage, UFDA, the urban fringe development, right? Urban fringe development. Why can't I remember what the A is for? Doesn't matter. That's going to haunt me all day. Area, thank you. Yeah, it shouldn't have been that hard. And that document is about it's a first pass at identifying how that community burden of population and growth is going to be shared, what neighborhood grows and to what extent it grows, and why it grows, and what's the basis for that growth. So that plan is in place. We're going through another planning session around urban transportation. We have plans around streets and other infrastructure. We have subdivision and zoning plans that are all about concentrating in the urban area, taking advantage of those resources and being efficient about that. We have all that stuff going on. Those plans are in the works. And so I guess my job and our job collectively is figuring out a way to execute those plans. And it ain't as easy as it looks. But it's important that we engage in that activity.
Thank you. And Derek, if there's a disagreement here, and the disagreement is on scale, that I think you perhaps made a comment about government, perhaps meaning federal government, but do you agree with John's assertion that at smaller scales you do find effective mobilization for the forces of transition?
Yeah, when I said no offense, I really meant it.
I wasn't offended.
And I know you weren't, so. But anyway, certainly part of, it's very important to build bridges and have relationships with everyone. And especially critical, I believe, is a relationship with local government. There is huge potential power there to speak to your representatives, to amplify your voice and organize. It's just the way the system's set up. And yeah, so speaking of scale, I mean, I think we're up against larger hurdles. And as you mentioned, it has something to do with corporate financing and the fact that our state constitution and our federal constitution are not really set up for citizen rights. They're citizen corporate rights that have more power than people. And the effort to change that is going to have to be a transition. And that starts, like, as we're talking about moving towards sustainability, it starts with awareness and education and bringing people together who share common ground. And I don't feel like a city government, would necessarily be at odds with that, this type of relationship. So certainly the transition is difficult, especially when you bring in political undertones. But like so many other things, you know, when you have a problem, or it also presents a solution or an opportunity to make a solution. So
We have manifest success stories in public health in certain domains. We have lacking in other domains. But Ted, you know, when you reflect on some of the challenges out there in the transition to a better future, what do you consider to be the magnitude? Should we be focusing on smaller problems, or should we go for the big stuff? Where are we in the environmental health domain?
I don't think there's a single answer there that one's better than the other. As you know, I'm disposed to think of this from my talk this morning as a systems problem with components that interact that then create a whole with a lot of crosstalk across those levels. And I think we can gain a lot of wisdom by observing how natural systems behave. So in fact, the Biomimicry Institute here in Missoula is teaching us a lot about that. And I think that it's not a leap of imagination to learn the lessons from natural systems and bring them into our eco-social systems. That, you know, because we're living, we're embedded in this ecological system. I mean, in fact, we're sort of the major player in many ways, right? Until we're not. So I think that actually we should look to nature for some wisdom here, and I don't think that there's a single answer. Systems develop their own behavior, and they go through these abrupt transitions when they cross tipping points where the speed of change can be remarkable. And not only that, but can be permanent. And you only recognize that you've crossed a tipping point sometimes after you've crossed it. And, you know, so ecologists who study the ecology of lakes or wetlands or forest systems and see how a certain amount of nutrients are introduced into it, it causes incremental change until all of a sudden it causes dramatic change. And the entire operation of the system and then has gone into a new set of functions, and you don't get back to where you were. You never get back. So this notion of change, the speed, I think that the idea of the transition communities makes so much sense because it's built on the notion of building resilience into communities where communities are functioning reasonably well and you're trying to maintain certain functions. And a resilient community is one that is able to absorb perturbations from the outside and still maintain, relatively speaking, its current level of functioning. But it's easy to imagine that you could perturb a system, an eco-social system, over a threshold, and a lot of that would disappear. So to get specifically to your question, I think there are both small-scale and larger-scale interventions whose purpose could be to provide resilience to the functioning system that you want. So you have some goal setting, you decide how you want the system to function, you recognize that there are multiple levels at which you can interact with it, and then consciously choose them. Whether it's in your own personal behavior, your own personal choices, as you were emphasizing this morning, Greg, or whether it's our institutions, who have this whole, the operation of the system in mind, or whether it's our governments that have the operation of the system in mind. But we're trying to preserve the resilience and the capacity of the eco-social systems to maintain the function that we want and not the one that might come onto us all of a sudden by surprise that we would not want at all. So,
Patricia, earlier you spoke of an urgency, and I'll use a medical term, triage, which is, for those in the non-medical, the worst first. And how do you prioritize the steps that we might need to take to transition to this healthier future?
I learn a lot from listening here. I think that it's got to be the community's voice coming together. Ted's comments and others about multifaceted intervention, intervening with everyone playing to their strengths, whether it has to do with transportation, with transformation of the medical care system into a health care system, into issues addressing transportation, sustainability and food, energy conservation. I've learned a tremendous amount from Beth Shank as a student in our program, and so I think this is where I work a lot with students. I learn and trust in their wisdom to lead with their heart and their minds in a way that embraces their own passion. That's the only way forward, is that this can't be imposed. There's got to be checks and balances, and then there's got to be a system where we can all swim in a whole lot of different directions at once in order to enact this type of change, because that's going to be what's required.
And John, you live in a different world. I mean, a world that we interact in. That's the political dynamic, where sometimes urgency is pushed aside in favor of political dynamics, power dynamics, money dynamics. How do you, as a leader in the political field, assure that the most urgent needs get taken care of first, even when we have all of this other noise and this other dynamic in the political arena?
Well, I think to a certain degree that's where those planning documents come to mind, and having a notion of what your holistic strategy is, and what your mission is as a community. Today the city of Missoula's mission is to create a sustainable community, and that means many things to many people, but largely everything we do, we sort of focus on the notion of what does this look like in 10 or 15 or 50 or 100 years, and to the degree that we can look that far ahead, I think we try to, within the sideboards of the folks who put us in office and charge us with leadership and give us the responsibility for stewardship over time. And there are issues that come up that have absolutely nothing in some ways to do with that strategic mission, but they are critical to the community in a different way, and you need to address them. So part of this is about acting, part of it is about reacting, and some of it is oddly enough beyond our control. And the thing about, interestingly enough, the thing about politics is that's how we make decisions. That's politics, I think, has sort of a nasty connotation if you happen to look at the Congress, for example, but fundamentally, politics is the give and take of how we together make decisions and move forward in one way or another. So we need those, and sometimes politics, for really good reasons, require us to change course.
And Ted, you work in the regulatory science arena quite often, so you have experienced the challenges of reaching consensus on what action to take to transition to this better future. Do you have any observations or examples or experiences you care to share?
Well, the regulatory framework, I've interacted with it a bit, not a whole lot. It's a messy process when a lot of stakeholders get together, but of course that's the nature of it. That's what this conversation is about, with people who come from varying perspectives. I tend to see regulations as being sort of in some ways, the lowest common denominator. It's kind of a safety net, right? But we can do better than that. Regulations tend to get established when people can no longer ignore sort of what they're seeing going on around them, and the data are kind of clear, and finally there's enough impetus behind it to say, well, we have to regulate this somehow. What appeals to me more is to see the businesses and institutions, for example, that are going beyond regulation, going beyond compliance. They're reaching out and saying, we can do better than that, and there are many examples. So I would agree with you that the regulatory framework is a messy one that forces people to come to decisions around something. It's often meant to be consensus. Sometimes you think you're working in a consensus situation, then all of a sudden somebody says, thank you for your opinion, and now this is what we're going to do. So then you realize it wasn't really consensus all along. I can play there for a while. Others spend a lot of time there. I have a lot of regard for people who do play there, but I again think it really, in some ways, is a lower common denominator.
You bet. And in reaching consensus, it's a challenge to define the will of the people. But in transitioning Missoula, Derek, you're faced with those challenges of trying to identify what the will of the people. We're transitioning from here to there, but where is there, and how do you find out what are the construct, what constructs, what characteristics are involved in there, and how do you identify and how do you move a group like a community forward?
Well, certainly in cooperation. I mean, like, I don't think anyone here would be able to do that independently. And the transition initiative, as you know, it's set up is, I mean, there's a number of 200 and some communities, I think, I might be wrong on that, in the United States that are official. And many of those communities aren't anywhere near where Missoula's at in regards to sustainable initiatives and having resilience, really progressive systems with regards to like food and transportation and just relationships between the university and the city and things that do foster transition. Given that, I mean, Missoula has just tremendous resources, and part of the process of working towards transition is identifying, and this has been done by so many different organizations, so it's almost like reinventing the wheel, but we do have a slightly different orientation in that we are looking at climate change and peak oil, where there is mission overlap with some organizations, and it's kind of one of the I guess, the charges that we've given ourselves is trying to figure out where the overlap is. And in that way, trying to find common ground to find out who the people are who come to the front, who come to the table, and that represent like their constituency, for example, members of different organizations. It'd be really hard just to limit it to, it should be everyone should have a say, you know, but hence the virtues and the problems with consensus decision making. But yeah, I'll just leave it at that.
Well, Marianne, I'm going to give you the opportunity, since I see from this angle you have the gray hair of wisdom, to give us some reflection on what has changed your thinking over time, you know, as you do a little personal reflection that you care to share with the group.
That's why I keep my gray hair. What has changed my thinking over time? Certainly having an intention of being fully awake at any given moment so that I notice what's going on around me and I'm open enough to learn from people like all of us here, and acknowledging that we do have an incredible, awesome privilege to be good stewards of this earth, as well as awesome responsibility to make sure that it continues to be. And for whatever reason, wisdom has given me a sense of great hope because of the people with whom I work and the people that I see who care deeply. So as we've been talking today and certainly last night and as I continue to do the work that I do every day, I think, how do we widen the circle of people who really, really care? Because when we care, we can't help ourselves but act. So that's it.
Well, before we close down the formal comments of the panel, I'd like you to join me in honoring the panel with our applause and thank them very much for their time. Thank you so very much. We're just about on schedule running off, but I was going to ask our host, do we have time for a couple of questions? What do you think? A couple of questions. We have a roving mic. And please address the panelist or identify the question as for anybody that wants to take it on. Thanks.
Oh, it better be good, Brian, he says. It's really good. Thank you all for your comments and for coming here this afternoon and sharing your ideas. My name's Neva Hassanen, and I was really pleased to hear a lot of people today talk about food. It's one of my favorite subjects. And I want to thank Beth and the folks at St. Pat's for having a wonderful local lunch for us at this time of year. It can be difficult, but they managed beautifully. I think that we can create markets for local food by things like, institutions like St. Pat's buying more locally, maybe buying CSAs as shares as benefits for your employees, that kind of thing. But we have to have to think systemically about this, as Dr. Shetler said, which is we have to have farmers and farmland in order to build a local food system. And since I didn't put this on one of my 10 tips, I just had to make an announcement. Sorry, this is not actually a question, this is an announcement. But it's really important because on Wednesday afternoon, the county commissioners, that local, part of that local government that we can be really close to, is going to be considering a subdivision called Riley Acres, which will basically carve up 12 acres of prime agricultural soil into 1 acre lots. There's a high likelihood that they will deny this, and we need to encourage them in that direction and the creation of a comprehensive policy to protect farmland in the county. Because like the plans that John referenced, there's planning documents from the early 80s saying we need to build a local food system, we need to protect farmland, and it hasn't been done, and the time is now, because we can't build a sustainable future without soil. So, yeah. All right, brothers and sisters, I have yours.
And do we have another question? One more question way over on the side. I saw a couple hands.
Thanks, Beth. My name is Marcia Hanks. I'm a nurse practitioner here. And I think Dr. Engen, your Mayor
Thank you
Engen.
very much.
Yeah.
Finally, somebody recognized.
You're on the hot seat today. I just wanted to know what we can do, and I think I probably speak for everyone here. What can we do to get Missoula plastic bag free?
So Ginny Merriam, the city's communications director, will I think confirm that she and I have been having conversations about how to do that. Lots of other communities have done it. I think we can get there. I need to approach it. I need to act in a way that doesn't create reaction. So I think I can learn from some other communities, but I would love to get there. This is Saturday, so let me see what sort of support I have. We'd sure like to get there.
How can we support you in that effort?
There will be a hearing about that at some point. And, I don't know if there's a plastic bag lobby, but we'll see.
So what's the opponents?
I see this has just turned into chaos and bedlam.
It's the way systems
Brian,
work.
there are opponents to sustainability. So there will be opponents. I don't know who they are. I mean, I haven't explored that notion, but there are folks who, you know, you will pry my plastic bag from my cold, dead fingers, I suspect. I suspect we will hear that at some point. So, you know, it's just one of those things. We gotta sort of lead through it.
If literally every school child brought something forward and they put in their pennies to say, we will give every citizen of Missoula a bag to take to the grocery store, is that something that will create a bill?
Mayor exploits children for political gain. No. I actually think there is a constituency for this, but it's we just have to be thoughtful about how we proceed so that we don't create the consequence that we have some enormous backlash and fear and all the stuff that comes from making a change that is, I mean, for some it's really self-evident and for others not so much. And we just, you know, we have to just be a little bit careful.
Although the image of pulling plastic bags out of cold, dead hands is an enlightening one, we have a very full schedule today, and we have an obligation to stay on schedule. But with that, I thank you as the audience for being here, and let's honor again our panelists.
A little bit. Thank you all.